everyone. Today we'll be speaking to an amazing personality, Abhiir Bhalla. He has represented India in the BBC World News in conversation with the General Secretary of the United Nations. He was also invited by the UK government and the Ramphal Institute to be a panelist on the conversation around air pollution in the Commonwealth. Let's hear from him. He's joining now.
Hi, Ishita. Can you hear me?
Hi, Abhiir. Yes, I can hear you. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for agreeing for this conversation. I think it's a great opportunity for all our followers, everyone, all the youth to learn more from someone who's just 19 years old, and you've accomplished so much. So please share your journey with us today.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So could you start off by introducing yourself? What are you currently occupied with? I know you have a lot of institutions you're working with alongside university work at the same time. Can you just give everyone a brief about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm currently an incoming third-year student at Ashoka University. One second, there seems to be a bit of a lag. Allow me to change my net.
Yeah, sure. We'll just wait. There's problems with the internet, I guess. Thank you so much for joining, guys. In the meantime, I think we can talk about what Abhiir has accomplished. So I'll be reading off his bio because there's a lot of things he has done and I don't want to go wrong anyway. So over the past 8 years, he has worked as a youth environmentalist independently, as well as with several organizations, with the Worldwide Wildlife Foundation, etc., even the Delhi Metro. Let's see if he has joined again so that he can explain us himself.
Thanks, Ishita. I'm so sorry. Seems to be some network issues. Really sorry about that. Yeah, I'll continue with my introduction as you asked. Essentially, I'm currently going into my third year, just finished my second year, at a university in India called Ashoka University, and I'm studying political science and international relations. But my academic interests aside, my true sort of passion is environmentalism, which is something I've been doing for the past 8 years, particularly in the field of air pollution and waste segregation. And for my work in those areas, the BBC identified me as amongst the foremost emerging youth environmentalists internationally. In terms of the work that I'm doing currently, I'm working with, as a volunteer, I'm leading a team of around 35 to 40 young individuals with a non-profit based in Delhi called Care for Air, which works pan-India to sort of build awareness around air pollution. Right now, of course, during the pandemic, it's been restricted to the online medium. We've been doing awareness building activities, advocacy workshops with schools, colleges, other such institutions. Pre-pandemic, of course, we were doing a lot of groundwork, which is something I'm very passionate about. I don't like to just talk and not act. So that's one of the sort of organizations I'm working with. Another organization that I'm working with is called the Ramphal Institute, which is a UK-based think tank where I'm producing a climate change podcast, which is called, for everyone here listening, they should probably check it out. It's called Candid Climate Conversations. And I've had the honor and privilege of interviewing some of the biggest names in the field of environment I've hosted Sunita Narayan, Dr. Robin Russell Jones. I'm also, fingers crossed, hoping to interview a two-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee. So big stuff going on there. Um, and finally, the third organization that I'm working with is called Youth Connect, which is also UK based. And essentially, it's a youth empowerment organization. The focus of our work is on India because the founders are sort of NRIs, even though the organization is headquartered in England. So over there, we're encouraging students to sort of speak up, whether it's through blogs, whether it's through our newsletter. And so, I mean, that's fairly a commonplace occurrence now. Everyone does that. But more than that, the interesting part that we're doing there is that we have a mentorship program for social initiatives, helping people who are passionate about a cause, they have an idea. We help them sort of take it from an idea and make it into reality through, we have mentors who help them with that. So yeah, I hope that introduction's not been too long, but that's essentially the stuff that I'm doing these days.
Wow, awesome. It's so inspiring listening to how many things you're involved in, how many things you're doing. And one thing I really like about what you said is that you value more action rather than just talking, discussion. And that was also one of my aims to start Globe Uplift, valuing action and doing something that is practical and feasible for like everyone to be able to, because small change is only what can bring bigger changes in the future.
Oh, for sure.
So thank you so much. So I have a few questions for you. So you said you were invited at the BBC News to speak to the General Secretary of the UN. So he mentioned that it is not enough to have climate action in developed world. So I just wanted to know your opinion on how do you envision the participation of developed countries in the environmental issues within the developing countries? So how do you envision like big corporations and like these big countries coming together to solve issues like witnessed within developing countries? Just your opinions.
That's an interesting question, and there's multiple sort of facets to that, in my opinion. I'll start with the developed versus developing divide. I fundamentally think that developed countries have a responsibility to help developing countries develop more sustainability, more sustainably. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Because if you think about it, if you look at London, if you look at California, these were cities, and in fact the countries in which they are. These are cities and countries which 30, 35 years ago, their air quality was as bad as Delhi's is right now, right? And poor air quality points towards what? It points towards emissions, industrial emissions, right? And so what we need to understand is the developed countries right now are developed countries by virtue of having exploited resources without a second thought. And now, when environment and sustainability is such a large, an important issue, they seem to be sort of pointing more than one finger towards developing countries. So that's problematic, right? I'm in no means saying that developing nations should have a license to sort of pollute, use coal endlessly. But what I am saying is that it's important that developed countries recognize that they have been a critical part of, getting the earth to the poor state in which it is currently, to sort of, they've had a major role to play in it. Now, what's the solution to this? We have an Indian economist, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, who I'm sure everyone's heard of. He had, I think 2017 in The Economist or one of those financial sort of newspapers, he proposed something called the Global Carbon Incentive Fund, which is a bit complicated to understand, but to put it very simply, it advocates for the equitable redistribution of funds for sustainable development, which is to say that technically speaking, the US will be paying India to adopt technologies which are environment friendly. To put it very simply, it's not as simple as that, but that's the best way to sort of explain it. And having said that, and this is something that's worked out. Recently, a year or two ago, Germany and a few other countries in the EU actually paid money to a South American nation. I'm forgetting the name. A South American nation for not cutting down their rainforests, right? Problem here is that the Global Carbon Incentive Fund is not being adopted. And we have climate change conferences year after year. We have COP26 coming up now in November. There's a whole lot of talk, but again, goes back to the point you mentioned, there's not a lot of action. So measures and sort of solutions such as the Global Carbon Incentive Fund need to be adopted, and they need to be implemented. So that's with regards to developed and developing nations. As far as corporates go, in my experience, there's a lot of this sense that people have that, Hindi mein they'll say that hum kuch nahi kar sakte, there's nothing we can do about it. It's governments or it's corporates who can do something about it. And to me, frankly, that's nonsense, to put it very bluntly, because I fundamentally believe that individual action is the most important. Now, a lot of people will turn around and say that, individual action is not enough. And I'm not going to lie, they're right. Individual action is not enough. But why it's important is because individual action, if you and I are doing something as simple as switching to a bamboo toothbrush, right? If you and I are doing that, we're inspiring five others to do that, our friends, right? It's a cool thing to do. So individual action builds up and it becomes societal action. And when something is a societal movement, that's when, you show to the governments that this is an issue you care about. Because the simple reality, in my opinion, is that, well, how should I say? The simple reality is that politicians aren't going to care unless they're electorally motivated, right? And at the end of the day, those are the guys sitting making the decisions. So, very simply put, it's individual action which leads to societal action, which inspires and shows to the governments and policymakers that, hey, this is an issue we care about, and you better act on it, you know? So yeah, I hope that answers
Definitely.
your question.
Yes, definitely. And the point about individual action, I think that really drove Globe Uplift, because usually, like, you must have observed as well, like on Instagram especially, there's a lot of like toxic competition related to like
Mm,
who's the best found in like promoting environmental issues or like global issues, and it's mainly
yeah,
about this, like the followers, the likes, this and that. But what we ignore is the mindset change that we bring to people, because we as Globe Uplift, we are also currently struggling with a bit of engagement with our posts and everything. But then what our core aim is to reinforce action and individual reflection of what we already do. So I think that's a really
right.
good mention, that just one or two of us making a really small change is better than nothing, than just accepting we can't do anything and just moving on. So wonderful thoughts. I think there's an internet connection problem. But in the meantime, can you hear me now?
It's just my bad day in terms of Wi-Fi. I think there was a power cut. So sorry. Go
Don't
on.
worry. Don't worry. It's fine. It's okay. Yeah, so I think we can move to the next question. I think this question would be like kind of really hard for you to say, but in your point of view, what do you think is the most important global issue with regards to environment that is most overlooked these days? Like, we can definitely say most of the environmental issues are overlooked, but
Yeah.
which one is the biggest issue that might contribute to resolve issues as well?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna give a biased answer because this has to do with the field in which I work very actively. There's two things, right? The first being that I always, I've had the privilege of speaking at a few platforms, and one thing which I've realized when I, speak and interact with people is that, it's when we talk about climate change, it's been reduced to a textbook definition. If you think about it, climate change, sustainability, global warming, These are things which kids are studying in class 6, 7, and 8 in their textbooks. And by virtue of that, there's a sense of disassociation which is created. They think that, hey, this is something we're reading about, but again, goes back to the same thing. It's governments and corporates who need to do something about it, which is not true, right? And that's exactly where our sort of, so I like to say that climate change is not the biggest problem we are facing. The biggest problem we are facing is our perception of it, our understanding of it, the way we treat it, right? And by extension of that, so that's definitely part one. The biggest sort of issue under the climate crisis is our perception of it, number one. Number two, when we talk about climate change, by virtue of this becoming such a textbook definition, such a sort of buzzword, if you think, if I was to ask a stranger what is climate change to you, and I tell them close your eyes for 5 seconds and think, I can say with 80% certainty that the answer I will get is that sea levels are rising. Or someone will say, oh, I see a polar bear struggling to stand on a piece of ice. Because these are images and ideas which have been sort of driven in. These are the conventional narratives around climate change. My argument, or my sort of point of view, is that more than global warming, more than melting glaciers, rising sea levels, all these conventional terms that we think about in association with climate change, the one factor which goes unnoticed, and here's where I'm biased, is air pollution, right? Air pollution is something that's looked at in isolation. But if you think about it, if you zoom out and you look at it from the larger picture, what is global warming? If I ask you what's global warming, you'll say greenhouse emissions. What is greenhouse emissions, right? Greenhouse emissions are air pollution. It's literally your industrial, your vehicular emissions. All of that is leading to the greenhouse effect. Sorry, right? So air pollution is a vastly underrated sort of how should I say aspect of climate change. And the second, of course, as I said, is the way we understand and perceive it.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I think our perception forms our action, and the more our perception is just that minute sea levels rising or this or that, it's definitely not bringing us closer to the true picture of what it actually
Yeah,
is. And as you said,
absolutely.
being it like in the school, the narratives in textbook, it's definitely like making us far away from like what's actually happening and like the actual effects than just like the theoretical understanding of all these concepts.
Precisely. Precisely.
Wow, great ideas. Can you also share a bit about your personal journey? Like how did it start? When did it start that you really felt like you really wanted to also pursue this for your career path? And also
Mhm.
how was it influenced into your life?
Honestly, so to be very candid, it feels strange when I say this myself, but back in class 6, I thought climate change was boring. I thought it's very dull and not interesting. And there's a bit of a story there, if you'll permit me. If I may say so, I was the teacher's pet in all other classes. But environmental, we used to have this sort of environment awareness class, which would happen once in 3 or 4 weeks. And in this environmental awareness class, I would do anything possible to sort of skip that class. I'd fake a stomach upset or I'd just outright bunk it. And naturally, that was very uncharacteristic given that I was, well, the teacher's pet in all other classes. One fine day, however, I sort of justice came around and I got caught and I was sent back into the classroom. And the facilitator was talking about air pollution. And that's how it really started because at that point in time, I was in class 6 and I used to have these seasonal sort of, I don't know, allergies or this sort of cold and cough, if you will, which was caused by air pollution. My doctor said that it was the poor air quality, and this is, I mean, fortunately for me, I touch wood, I wasn't impacted that badly. But for example, in 2019, India lost 1.67 million people due to air pollution related complications, you know. So I was fortunate, and I am fortunate, but air pollution is harming our health in so many different ways, and people don't know about it. So to learn that it was personally affecting me, and then to, you know, by extension of that, to learn that air pollution is part of a much larger issue called climate change, that's how it really started for me. Right. And then one thing led to another. I sort of took some more initiative in the environment club in my school. I set up a few projects. Then I was leading those projects. Then I was leading the club in my school. And then, of course, you know, once I came to college, I started to sort of I decided that, you know, hey, I need to sort of make an impact on my own, independent of any organizations. And that's when I started reaching out. I started working as a freelancer with some of these nonprofits, volunteering with some of these nonprofits, and you know, because it's really about doing the work you're passionate about, I think, at the end of the day. So yeah, I think one step led to another, and in recent years, you know, I've been fortunate to have uh, my work recognized, and yeah, I like I said at the start, you know, for me, it's about letting the work speak for what your cause is, rather than just a whole lot of talk and no action.
Yeah, definitely. That's really nice to know. And also your story. Thanks for being so open with all of us. And it's such a big contrast. You look back and be like, oh, that was just a weird phase.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And also something about like we spoke about the terminology and how much there's like concepts within climate change that nobody really takes interest. Like I understand it is quite boring to actually like look at it from like a knowledge theoretical perspective than actually like
hmm
know what is exactly happening. So do you have any like suggestions for our audience or like any followers who watching who really want to like delve more into this but are unsure how to sort of like start now, and some are even kind of like shy to admit they don't really exactly know what is happening even though it's so obviously happening. So what is something you want to like any recommendations like books, podcasts, obviously candid climate conversations, but anything that you have learned
of
with
course.
me.
Yeah, sure. So, well, there's a lot to answer under that. Well, I'll start with the first thing. I fundamentally believe that we do not need 100 people living a perfectly sustainable lifestyle. What we need are thousands, millions of people living an imperfectly sustainable lifestyle. I don't claim to be, you know, Hindi may we have this saying "doodh ka dhulava," which means I'm not perfect, right? So I'm not doodh ka dhulava. I also sort of I shower. I don't use a bucket bath, but I do 10 other things which are sustainable, right? So we need everyone to do their bit and slow and steady move ahead with, you know, how should I say, take it to the next level one step at a time. Start by making a switch from a plastic toothbrush to a from a plastic straw to a metal straw, from a plastic toothbrush to a bamboo toothbrush. One thing at a time, you know, because to go from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds like a Ferrari is just not possible and it's not realistic. Um, so that's the first thing, right? And we need to have this sort of culture which is there of calling out people that, you know, oh, you're an environmentalist, how can you sort of be doing this? You know, you can't you need to appreciate what everyone is doing as long as everyone is doing their bit, and then encourage them to take it to the next level. So that's number one. Secondly, of course, yes, I would encourage everyone to check out my podcast, which is called Candid Climate Conversations. And I mean, forget beating my own drum on that front. It's phenomenal because I've got a bunch of experts from around the world. I've interviewed a Grammy Award winner. I've interviewed India's top environmentalist. And they're all bringing different. I've interviewed a photojournalist who's, you know, covered climate change from on different all 6 continents, you know, around the world. And So it really brings different perspectives. It's your sort of one-stop shop, if you will, for all things pertaining to climate change. So that's number two, I'd say. Three is I won't recommend books. That's just too pretentious. I won't lie. I haven't read more than, I don't know, five or seven climate change books myself. But what I will say is that it's important to know how climate change is manifesting itself in the areas around you. Because once you learn that, you automatically will have an interest in knowing, hey, uh, how is it impacting the rest of the world? Because we have so many cities and countries and localities around the world where one year you have a flood, 6 months later or one year later you have a drought, and there is nothing that explains that other than climate change.
Yeah.
So start small, and that's how the way, I think that's really the way forward. And finally, lastly, in terms of tips that I would give, um, I always say that it's important to be passionate, especially in the social, non-profit, environmental sector. You're not getting paid for this, right? So it's important that you're passionate. It's important that you care to make a difference. And then you sort of, let your action speak for itself, and then you'll perhaps get some recognition if your work is, genuine, and if it's impactful. So that's what at least drives me. So I would say the advice would be passion and commitment and enthusiasm, and don't be afraid to ask. I host a weekly series of live videos on Instagram with different environmentalists. In my most recent live video, I learned so much about composting. I've of course been doing and telling people about composting for years, but just this one live video, I learned so much. I didn't know, that there are so many things you can do. So yeah, that's what I would say, I think.
Wow, superb. Yeah, I watched your recent live with Miss Vani Murthy, and it was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
really insightful. Yeah, I think what you said, I agree. We need to just take baby steps and just try as much as we can. If I can, sorry, just day before yesterday, I was just outside, and I bought coconut and then I forgot my bamboo straw. Like I am the one who actually started bamboo straw initiative in my school, and
Okay.
that moment was just so, I felt so guilty. Like, but I think we should just acknowledge our mistakes and sort of learn from them because, well, you can't really do much, can you? So I think from next time you sort of like understand, you carry your straw, just even these small things that we can like, do in our lifestyle, like just small changes can like really impact a lot of things. So I also
Yeah, yeah.
know, like
It,
you've been in this sort of field for like 8 years now. So, like when you started, how different were the climate concerns, like climate related concerns those days versus what is it now, and like how have you seen it evolve? Like you must have like been into this like from long time, sort of observing everything that's happening. What are your views on it, and like how has it developed over these years?
Ishita, before I come to that, I want to comment on your point about the coconut water. And excuse me if this sounds too pompous, but so I devised a way to sort of deal with this. And this goes back to the point that, none of us are perfect and it's difficult to be perfect. I also forget to sort of take a bag from home if I'm going to the market, and then I don't want to use those plastic bags. But another interesting sort of quote unquote punishment, if you will. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Yeah, so another sort of method which I made for myself, this is again pre-pandemic, is that if I was going to Starbucks, to get a coffee once in 2 weeks, once a week, they have this thing where they'll give you a discount for 10 rupees off if you bring your own cup. And ever so often I would forget to sort of bring my cup, but I was in a hurry. So the way I would punish myself is I would sit down, I would say, hey, if I've not got my cup, I don't want to use plastic.
Yeah,
So if it means I'm going to be 10 minutes late for my next thing, so be it. But I'm going to sit here. If I want that coffee, I'll have it in a cup or in a glass, which is, reusable. It's washable, and I'll do that there. So, even when we forget, if we're creative enough, if we're innovative enough, there's a way around.
Yeah.
So that was one point I wanted to get in. Could you sort of just quickly repeat your question, if you don't mind? About, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but just talking about that point, I think what you said, this point again comes back to our mindset, because
Oh, for sure.
a VUCA world at the moment, like everything's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Like we can just do what's in our control. And I think what you said is like a really creative way to look at climate change as well, and like the small things that you can do. So yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for that. I'll use that next time. Hopefully there's no next
Yeah,
time.
yeah, hopefully.
So yeah, coming back to my question, so like you've worked in this field, like you've been observing so many the past 8 years. What is something changed about the climate, or what is something that has gotten worse, or like something evolved that you've like personally witnessed throughout your journey?
That's an interesting question. It's not one which I've been asked before, actually. Well, my sort of thoughts, thinking on my feet on that would again be two or three aspects. One would be the fact that I would have, I can tell you what I expected and what didn't happen, right? Environmental apathy is something which still exists, and that's shocking. I remember in school I used to have this. Well, I mean, I call him a friend. I don't know if he really was a friend after whatever he said, but in school I used to have this chap in my class in grade 9 and 10 who would say, I was at that point in time I was representing school at a lot of these environment competitions and debates and so on and so forth. And there would be this one guy and some of his friends perhaps who would just, they were jealous that I was getting to bunk class and represent school. So they would be like, oh, there goes Abhiir to sort of straighten every blade of grass in the field, which is demeaning given sort of the work that you're doing. So of course, I mean, I used to take it as a joke, but if you look back at it, it's a sort of hurdle or a disincentive, or it's definitely discouraging, right? If I may. So and that apathy is something which I see even in college. Now, of course, I've been fortunate that, over the years, I've sort of worked and let my work sort of speak for itself. I hope it's inspired a few people along the way. So that kind of, disassociate, that kind of, how should I say, discouragement is not something I face from my own peers, but there is still apathy in the sense that, oh, environment is such a boring thing, or oh, um, uh, I don't know how to say this politically correctly. This is just something, we are not interested in. It's not. I've even had the misfortune of hearing someone say that, oh, it's such a girly thing, which is incredibly, questionable. All of these things, that apathy is not changed, and that's after I thought Paris Climate Agreement, Greta Thunberg, so many movements have happened. That's not changed. That's number one. Number two is that air pollution, again, sorry, this is just my area of work, so perhaps I'm obsessing over it, but air quality is not improved. We've got politicians in Delhi and in India doing a whole lot of talking, a whole lot of photo ops. They're setting up these air pollution smog towers in the city, if you will. But when the AQI level is off the charts, literally cannot be monitored by your AQI devices. What do you think these small 20, I don't know, 20 kilometer square, towers will do? That's a bit large. I might be off in the numbers. But point being, no matter how large air purification tower is, it can't clean Delhi's air. Right? So we need to look at switching to more sustainable solutions. So yeah, and of course, there's the thing that I detest the most is there's a whole lot of hypocrisy, which is why I say, fine, it's good to confess that I'm not 100% sustainable. I don't follow 100% zero waste lifestyle, but the 10 things that I do perfectly. But we
Yeah.
have people who say, you know, if I'm telling you that, my advice is switch to metal straws, and if I'm not using metal straws, that's hypocrisy. So we need a lot more of these, we have a lot of these young environmentalists out there. What's unfortunate is that perhaps many of them might be doing it just for their college CVs or resumes. So that's another thing, if someone's starting out with an initiative, I like to, have them see it through, go through with it. So yeah, those are broadly a few sort of issue areas, if you will, over the past few years that I've noticed.
Wow. Great points mentioned. But yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think it comes back to the point about passion for whatever you're doing. And we, as environmentalists, content creators for like global issues and everything, we are trying our best. But although there's like a lot of setbacks even in our journeys, and people don't really cooperate as much. Like just yesterday, someone asked me, so how are you going to continue with Globe Uplift? You won't have time because of university, this and that. But it's just not something that I would continue and leave. While it's sort of an ongoing long project, and I think people really need to understand that something when you associate yourself with and something that's like for a really big cause, it's like you don't like leave it in the middle, sort of. It's again come
Yes,
back to your point about CV, college essay, this and that. Yeah, that's really evident these days, and we just
absolutely. Yeah.
the true essence of why we're doing this. So
Yeah, I think people need to realize that the cause is bigger than them. And, at the very least, if they have to move on for college, or if they have other commitments, which is understandable, have a succession plan, hand it over to some of your juniors, your friends, let them take it forward. So yeah, I mean, definitely.
yeah. Also, another question I wanted to ask you. You've like attended so many different conferences on climate change and everything else. What is one thing that you have really learned that you might not have learned if you were not in those conferences? Be it about the people involved in these things, or be it like how they view the situation, like your conversation with the UN General Secretary. What was something that you sort of personally learned from him that we might not be aware and it's worth sharing with us?
Hmm. You're asking some really good questions. You should look at a career in journalism, perhaps. But again, two parts to that question. I think what I've learned from these conferences, I don't know if this is my pessimism speaking up, but again, a whole lot of talk, not a lot of action. And the solution to that, which is something I've learned through these conferences, is that, and I'm going to take the example of COP26, which is coming up this November, the Conference of Parties, which is the climate change conference, which happens every year for the people who may not know. So COP26 is happening this November, and this year as well. Mr. Alok Sharma, who is the UK president of COP, has declared that there are going to be five themes. Now, in a 1 week or I don't know 9 day conference, they want to discuss five themes, and these themes are themes such as clean transport, clean energy, biodiversity restoration. These are huge topics. So to discuss five of these in 7 to 10 days is impossible. So my key takeaway is that it's good to be a part of conferences where there's a narrow area of focus, right? Where you can have conversations which matter, and you can have policy outcomes or decisions which matter and are impactful. Because to talk about everything under the sun, and then it's like what's the saying? Jack of all trades, master of none. It's just like that. So it's better to have streamlined conversations, streamlined decision making. So yeah, I think that's what I've learned. As far as my conversation with the UN Secretary General goes, well, I don't. One thing I will say is that I requested for greater, inclusivity in UN youth forums, because I've always believed, why should there be just one Greta Thunberg, right? I've always said that there needs to be a so to say, a Greta Thunberg from each country, each city, and they need to have an international voice, because everything else apart, Greta to her country is looked upon as a symbol of prestige at this point in time. So if each country and each city, let's start with country and cities can come in later, but if each country can have their own Greta, that also puts a pressure on the local governments to sort of start being more environment friendly, right? So it's all multifaceted. It all has multiple dimensions which are beneficial.
I agree. And with regards to the conferences, like such big words like biodiversity, this and that, I think that's another reason why we as like citizens are just stuck in the jargon, the theoretical understanding, than actually knowing what's in our control, what can be actually
Yeah.
done of just talking, discussion, this and that. So I definitely agree. And of course, inclusion is, I think, very important, especially in this era where you're like coming together as in an international conference. There's no like need for
Absolutely.
one particular country, because I think all of us are facing this. And one thing that many of like the people have said is what we all have in common is this sport, and what our actions contributed to it can only like solve the issue. So yeah,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So, and one big question that everyone is wondering, how to sort of get to where you are, like not as like a fame or anything point of view, but like some level of understanding where you sort of like know and understand and have that like thought in mind about what needs to be done, what needs to be prioritized in terms of the environment, or be it anything as an individual that you do, some choices in your life. So what is one thing like you want to share that about yourself that you have adopted? And yeah, just tips for newcomers.
Sure. Again, gonna recommend a career in journalism. The questions that you're throwing at me. Well, I think as far as the first part, talking about the knowledge, I have never, I can confess this with very candidly, I have never studied environmental science, right? And even now at college, I'm not studying the academic side of environmental science. Sure, I'm looking at it for perhaps, my postgrad, but that's a whole other story. So the point being that on the job learning, so to say, or even just experiential learning can go a really long way. In my experience, interacting with the communities that I do through my nonprofits, interacting with the audiences that I do, I have learned and also given so much, which perhaps I dare say scientists may not know. Environmental scientists may not be cognizant of the ground reality. They may have an idea for a fancy hydropower project which is environmentally friendly, but they don't know the ground reality. They don't know that perhaps it's destroying, sure, they'll probably look in marine ecosystem and its damage on that, but they may not be looking at how it's adversely impacting, sorry, how it's adversely impacting the surrounding biodiversity and ecosystem, right? So I feel like, at least in the field in which I'm in, ground learning goes a long, long way, and that's what it's been for me throughout. And often I've been asked to speak at conferences where perhaps my knowledge about the topic on which I'm asked to speak is 60%. That's how you get the remaining 40%. You read up, you learn, you talk to people in that sector, and that's how I sort of grown in terms of my knowledge and in terms of my experiences. So that's the first part. Talking about what was your second part? Sorry, I think you were asking me about your the work, or what was it?
So sort of just your thoughts, like how, so you as a personality, like you have these particular set of thoughts like now adopted to what you're doing. So as like
Mm-hmm.
individuals, how to sort of like that level of understanding, like prioritizing individual choices and sort of just things in mind that you think of that we could potentially adopt.
At least in my case, it's about knowing the problem. It's about knowing that the problem is as large as it is, right? Because knowing that generations after mine and my generation, 20 or 30 years, 2 or 3 decades, 4 decades from now, will be the ones which will be suffering from the adverse impacts of climate change. Of course, we've seen the impacts already, but the really adverse ones, 2, 3, or 4 decades from now. Knowing that, the generations before us have perhaps shrugged the responsibility off themselves, that's what really drives me. In terms of suggestions, again, if I can sort of give one last anecdote, um, I had one of India's top after my appearance on the BBC. I had one of India's top newspapers. I'm not going to name them, but reach out to me, and they asked me to write an article on what can we do in our day-to-day life to be more sustainable. And I was more than happy to oblige. I sent that in, and I get a response from the editor after 5 days that hey, the solutions you suggested are too simplistic, and we'd expect much sort of how should I say much more nuanced solutions from a environmentalist such as yourself. And now let's look at some of the solutions I suggested. Um, First was that, I know that in India, a lot of us used to look up to and, I wouldn't say look up to, but we used to emulate the West a lot 20 or 30 years or even before that, right? And a common practice in the West is that they walk down to their neighborhood markets, they walk, they cycle, they don't take their cars. On the other hand, anyone in India who I know who is privileged to own a motor vehicle, whether it's a bike, whether it's a motorbike, whether it's a car, they take their cars to the market, even if it's just down the road, and that's absurd. So the first solution is to switch to, walking, cycling whenever possible. Similarly, as I said, plastic straw to metal straw, plastic toothbrush to bamboo toothbrush, composting, switching off. My dad keeps telling me, switch off the lights and fans when you leave the room. It's a bit amusing, but at the end of the day, it's going towards reducing your carbon footprint. So why not do that? If you're at a traffic light, switch off your car for more than. So that's a tricky one, in fact. If you're at a traffic light, if the signal is more than 20 or 25 seconds, then switch off your car. If it's less than 15 to 20 seconds, then it's better to keep it on, because the power you're wasting is sorry, excuse me. So those are some things which all of us can do easily, no effort at all. Nobody's asking you to sort of go make a new dustbin and collect all your plastics. That's a second level. Do simple things first and then move in that direction.
Yeah, wow. That's a bit weird because I think, again, it comes back to like how our mentality is sort of like influenced by the social media as well as like news articles, publishing departments, because such simple
Yeah,
things are neglected, even though it's so simple and easy to accomplish for everyone. It's, yeah, that's how it is. Need everything complex, crisp, but nothing feasible, nothing practical that can be done
absolutely.
for everyone. So, wow, amazing conversation. I personally learned so much, and I'm sure everyone did. And whoever's going to watch this video after when I share it, it's very insightful. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I know you're like associated with a lot of things at the moment, but I really appreciate your time and also all the support you have given to all your organizations and everything that you've like positively contributed to our world. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Ishita. Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here, and I wish you all the best with Globe Uplift. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. See you.
Thanks.
Stay safe. Bye. Bye.